how did your day start that day?
You need to go home right now. It's something about your dad. There's an emergency.
They had to call an ambulance and he was on his way to the hospital. I think there's just always a part of me that kind of had this gut feeling that something was going to happen to him.
Bruising on his chest, gash on his head. He's found face down in the hotel room.
And it's technically an investigation at this point. So, like, we can't have anyone interfering. We didn't want to invite speculation into this whole situation either.
It didn't feel like it was real life anymore. It was a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going.
We're here.
We are here.
Welcome to the It's Going podcast.
Hi.
My name's Isaac.
And I'm Susie.
So, Mom,
Yes,
how's it going?
it's going.
5 years ago, March 8th of 2018, our lives were turned upside down for forever in an instant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was.
So what happened? What happened that day? What do you remember?
Oh, I feel like my day started out really complicated because there's context that needs to come into it. So I feel like we should start with, how did your day start that day? It was a Thursday. And like we said, March 8th, 2018. So how did your day start?
I was 17. I was on the verge of graduating high school. I was in post-secondary doing my prerequisites for nursing school.
Those who don't know what post-secondary is, in the state that we're from, it's essentially a way for you to go to college during high school.
Yeah, the government pays for, if you have good enough grades and you qualify, the government essentially pays for you to start college early. And so from 11th and 12th grade, I was full-time at the college. And in 12th grade, part of that actually, I got to take my EMT classes and get certified as an EMT, kind of to start working in the medical field before I started as a nurse. But so I was in EMT class, woke up like any other morning. I'm pretty sure I skipped breakfast. I remember.
Did you have like test outs that day?
Yeah, I remember going in. I turned my phone on. Well, I think I just turned it on like do not disturb or something.
Either way.
I was unreachable because we were doing like skills testing.
Yeah.
And so we were kind of in the process of doing like log rolls for C-spine precautions, which if you're in the medical field, you'd know what that is. If you're not, it's not very important. But, we were practicing medical skills essentially for the field. And I wasn't really paying attention. I remember seeing that you called me, but I was in class and you knew that. So I kind of just ignored it. And then security walked in.
Well, let's back up.
Okay. Yeah.
So to give a little bit of context, I worked overnights in the ER. I was in the middle of RN school, so I was working as an LPN in a hospital.
You didn't work in the ER yet?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Not the ER. I was working on a cardiac floor.
Yep.
Overnights.
As an LPN.
But I was in school as an RN, and I had worked Tuesday night overnight. I had, on the way home Wednesday, spoke to my husband, and he was out of town for a business trip, which not abnormal. He traveled for his job. He was about an hour and a half away, and during our course of the conversation driving home, he had made it known that he was going to end up staying another night because he had some things to wrap up. Again, not abnormal. This happened off and on, where things came up last minute with customers, and his job was to deal with it. And so we had a conversation like we do any other time, and got home. And normally I would go to bed because I'd worked all night, but it was one of those days where I was just revved up, and sometimes you just can't fall asleep. And the longer you stay awake, the harder it is to fall asleep. And so I ended up staying up all day that day. I had dinner with my sister that evening, and I remember
Wednesday evening.
Wednesday evening, and I remember after dinner, it was roughly around 7 o'clock, maybe a little bit after. I had been waiting, I think, for my Uber, and I texted my husband Eric, which I'd been married for 19 years, with him for 20. Isaac was our only child, and I
Is your only child.
is our only
Still
child.
currently the
Yes,
only
I
child
don't
that
have
you
any
have.
other children. um, so I texted him because I normally, we talked often throughout the day, so it wasn't abnormal to just touch base before both of us went to bed. I hadn't gotten a response, which I had like a weird feeling, but at the same time, something about Eric is he was a very hard sleeper. So he dealt with insomnia. And so when he did fall asleep, he slept really hard. Like we used to joke that, if we ever had a fire, we were in trouble because we would never wake him up and get him out of the house.
Hmm.
And so him not answering a text message, again, not abnormal. I think I called him and he didn't answer. And it was like, again, around 7:15, again, not abnormal because he did work early. So like he would travel and then he'd get up at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And again, he dealt with insomnia. And so if he would get up or if he got, if he had a long day, occasionally he would go to sleep early and then he would sleep really hard. So
So morning of
yeah, not
Thursday morning.
abnormal, but also kind of weird feeling, but like not gonna make a big deal about it. So left him text message, called him a few times, left voicemail. Um, Went home, went to bed because I hadn't slept all day. So I went home. I slept till 10 or 11. No, it was about 10. And I got up and I'm like going to make coffee and I all of a sudden realize that I had no text messages, no missed calls, nothing from your dad.
Hmm.
So had he fallen asleep early the night before because he was overtired and
He would have
needing
been
to
up
sleep,
earlier.
he would have been up. He always was up super early, super early. And because it was the day he was coming home, he would have been probably almost home at that point because he was only an hour and a half away.
Right.
He didn't like stick around and like
So you got real concerned because you were
all of
like,
a
"This is
sudden,
abnormal that I haven't heard from him yet."
yeah. And if he had fallen asleep, he would have texted me and been like, "Hey, sorry, I was asleep last night when you texted, when you
Yeah.
called, that like
Yeah.
I'm on my way home, etc." Nothing. There's no text,
Dad
no
was
phone
always very
calls.
good at communicating that stuff with
Super
you.
good.
And so you got worried, and what did you do next?
I texted him, no
Hmm.
response. And he didn't have read receipt or anything on his phone because again, it was his work phone. So,
Sure.
um, and then I called him, no answer. And again, just kind
Something
of
felt wrong.
didn't, yeah, it wasn't right. So I pulled up, find my iPhone to see where he was at because maybe, if he's on his way home, etc. And his phone was still at the hotel in the place that he was, which was again an hour and a half away.
Yeah.
Not normal because it was already close to or past checkout time. I don't remember what their checkout time was. And I'm just like, this is not him. He should be on his way home. He should have already contacted me. So I call the hotel and I asked to be patched through to his room. So like he's not answering his phone. And I think I'd called a few more times on his cell phone. He answered it, or he didn't answer the phone. And I'm starting to feel really nervous and I know something's not right. And so I called the hotel back and I talked to the receptionist and I said, something's not right. He should be on his way home already. I haven't been able to get a hold of him since the morning prior. So I'd like to do like a well check on him. And so she said, okay, and got off the phone,
Hmm.
facilitated that.
Meanwhile, all this stuff is happening. I have no idea.
He
I'm
has
just
no
in
idea.
school,
Nope.
doing my thing. I'm not really. worried about dad. He, it wasn't. I didn't. It's not like he ever, texted me and was like, "Hey, I'm on my way home," or
Yeah,
from work or
no,
whatever.
it
Um,
was a normal day for
right,
you.
yeah, and so I remember from your version of this story, because we've talked about this a
Oh
lot,
yeah.
obviously.
Mhm.
That they went up and they checked on him, and um,
Well, they couldn't get in.
right.
So, because he always put the security lock on his door. So, they couldn't get in. They had to call security to get into the room. So, again, not answering the door. Um but they called me back, we couldn't get in. We had to call security. The receptionist at the time tells me that they had to call an ambulance and he was on his way to the hospital. So that's the information that I had at that point. And
So you tried to call me at that point.
so at that point, I'm like, there's nothing else they can tell me at that
Hmm.
point, especially, the hotel receptionist. And I'm like, okay, like I'm gonna come. Here's my phone number for, whoever needs it. And I get off the phone, I text Isaac several times,
Nothing.
not answering.
Yeah.
Then I call you several times, not answering. And I knew you had test out. So I was like, because I just like obviously it was an emergency, but as a parent, like you don't want to unnecessarily like traumatize or stress your child out. And so I was just like, I mean, I know this is not good, but also like I don't want to overreact, but
But also, my dad was going to the hospital, as
that's
far
true.
as we knew. So you, so from my perspective, you obviously called the school.
I called the school and I was like, you have to get him out of class. He needs to come home. It's an emergency.
Yeah. And
So
so
then for
so
you,
I was in the middle of, I think I was in the middle of like talking with my instructor, like about the skills thing, or we were in the middle of a skills test. I don't even remember exactly what I was doing. I just
lots
remember
of stuff is fuzzy
security
from that
walked
day.
in, talked to one of my instructors, and they called my name, and I looked over and security was there, and I went up, and he was like, you need to, your mom called looking for you because you weren't answering your phone. You need to go home right now. It's something about your dad. There's an emergency. And like immediately, I remember my heart sank. And there was a lot of stuff going on, behind the scenes with my dad up at that point. Just, we were very, very close. But for the last probably 6 months before this event, there was a lot kind of in the background with our family that we were dealing with. And so because of those things, and we'll get into it, but because of those things, my heart kind of immediately sank.
Sink into your butthole.
pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so like
And,
just a little thing about us medical, ER, we have a little bit of a morbid sense of humor. So you will see that throughout
yeah.
this.
I start rushing home, and I as soon as I get out of class, I called you and was like, what the heck is going on?
And all I
And
knew
you're
at that
like,
point was exactly what
yeah,
I
you
just
just said, I don't
explained.
know what happened. Your dad's on his way to the hospital. We need to go figure out what's going on. And
Hmm.
I was like, okay. And so it was about 10-minute drive home from the college. And so I started driving home. I get home, I pull into the driveway, I go in through the house to the garage. And when I walk in, you were on the phone
Yeah,
with the sheriff, I believe.
right at that point, actually, the sergeant of the police department in that city had called me, like right as he was walking in. And when you walked in from the garage, there was like an entryway, like an opening to the from the living room to the kitchen. So I was like right in that like archway.
Mhm.
And I'm on the phone with the sergeant and he's I don't even remember what he was explaining to me, but I said something like I think he asked me like, "Okay, the receptionist let you know what was going on?"
Well, and so from my perspective, right? Just to start
Mhm.
with that, because I think um, I walked in, you were on the phone, and I remember kind of coming around the corner, and I couldn't hear what the sergeant was saying to you on the phone because you had it up to your ear. But then I remember you saying um, something about an autopsy,
No, I didn't say anything about autopsy.
or
No, so what happened was I'm listening and he no, he said that he was explaining, I guess, like I don't even remember exactly what he was explaining, but I just remember saying, "Yeah, I know we're going to be coming down there because I heard he's on his way to the hospital in an ambulance." So like, you know, something. I think he was trying to explain like how to get a hold of him or whatever, and I'm like, we're gonna be down there, and he goes, oh no, no, like he's not going to the hospital, he's dead.
And,
And I was just like, okay. And you like really just go into shock at that point. You're just
mhm.
like, okay.
The
And
whole world just kind of sinks away, and you're just kind of like,
it's just slow mo. You
yeah.
just, it just, yeah, I don't
And
even know how to explain it. And I walked over to the island and you were kind of following because you were sort of trying to figure out what was going on and you were standing on the end of the island. And I just said, okay, so like, what do we do? Like, what's the process? Like, I want to come see him. And he was like, no, you can't come see him because he died alone in a hotel room. He They have to do an autopsy and an investigation, so you can't see him until after the autopsy. Well, he said autopsy and you heard him say it through the
yeah,
phone.
okay,
And all I remember is at that point, because I hadn't like looked at you and said he
right.
died.
But the details. So for me, right, the details of that whole first week after we found out that he died are all very jumbled, and like the
Hmm.
day to day is very, in my memory, is very difficult to remember the
Some
details. But
are very
I
clear and
yeah,
some are
but
very muddled.
right. A lot of the details of that week are gone. Like, but there are very specific events throughout it that I remember clear as day. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but I remember overhearing,
Autopsy.
or even just, I just remember hearing something
You
that
heard
made me
autopsy.
realize he's dead.
Yep. And you
And
literally looked at me and you
I was gone.
just collapsed on the stairs. So we had stairs like that went upstairs.
Stairs that went
Stairs
upstairs.
that went
Wow,
upstairs.
that's very insightful. Um,
From the kitchen, like on the end of the island. So like you
yeah.
backed up and just sank onto the stairs
Well,
and just like literally fell apart.
yeah. I
And I'm
mean,
still trying to figure out what's going on and
well,
like what the
and like
process is.
my dad and I were extremely close.
Hmm.
I mean, us as a whole family,
Yeah.
we're very tight knit. We've always had very open communication. We've always been very close, and I mean, my dad and I did so much together. He
Hmm.
absolutely adored me, and I adored him, and I looked up to him in every way.
Hmm.
And and part of that was my perspective of him up until over the probably 6 months before he died had kind of shifted because of some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. But ultimately, I mean, like, we were still extremely close, and I was still expecting for us to work everything out, and for everything to be okay, because I had no reason to think otherwise.
Yeah.
But yeah, I had never, I mean, I lost my grandpa when I was 14, and we were very
Yeah. So 4
close.
years before your dad died, your grandpa died,
But
who was, well, your great grandpa, because he's
right,
my grandpa, but you guys were like
we were very
he
close.
like super super close.
But I never,
And his was different. Like we knew he was dying.
well,
He
we didn't. He had
Well,
a
we
heart
didn't,
attack,
but we did, and he was on life support for a little while, so there was some time to adjust to it.
right? But in this situation, right, like, I, normal day, and then all of a sudden, hey, something's wrong, you need to get home. And then you're thinking, or I'm thinking, right, like, oh, he's in the hospital,
Hmm.
something happened, maybe he got hit by a car,
And he
or
traveled, so
you know
that
I
wasn't
didn't
like
even know that he was still in the hotel room. I didn't
yeah.
have the details that you did. So, like, he traveled, maybe he was driving home, got in a car accident. Like, that's the sort of thing that was going through my brain. But I never imagined that, like, it was gone.
Hmm.
And then, and also, I hadn't seen him for quite a few days. It was almost like a
Well, because
week.
he'd been gone like 2 or 3 days prior to that, and then he
Right.
stayed an extra night, and
So because he left on what, Monday?
probably or
And
Sunday
so, and
night.
this was the Thursday. So,
Yeah.
like, I hadn't seen him all week. I talked to him last on Tuesday night, which was like a full day and a half prior.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, it was just gone. And
He's not
like, and
there.
I knew what that meant, but like, I don't know. Everything melted away, and I had a panic attack. I couldn't, like, focus on anything,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
And I just remember you like collapsed. I'm trying to understand like what the process is because again, you so a little bit of context about me is that like my entire life I had a very chaotic family and a very chaotic upbringing and I have I was the oldest child, oldest sibling, and I always was the person. I like to joke that I was the crisis manager of my family. So I sort of automatically went into this like mode of like managing this crisis, right? So there's an element of shock that just happens where you're just like, I don't even know how to process this. And then there's this other part of me, again, being the parent, being the person I am who's dealt with the things that I've dealt with, who's just like, okay, I need to figure out like the what's, the hows, like the logistics of what we're dealing with
Hmm.
here. And so I'm on the phone and I'm just trying to figure out like, okay, we can't go see him. So like it's not the same as the movies. Maybe in some situations, but like, there you see shows, you see TV movies, and it's always like you have to go to the morgue to identify them, or like you have to go to the morgue.
But
And
he had his ID on him. He was in the hotel room. He was in his hotel room. So like
right.
they immediately knew who he was.
Yeah. And they were just like, no, that's not how this works. And it's technically an investigation at this point. So like we can't have anyone interfering. So he's just gone. We have no information at this point. It's just sit and wait. And
Yeah.
so at the
Well, and it's oh geez, we need to start telling
we have to
people
call people.
and
Yeah.
like start getting stuff sorted. And
We decided too that we still wanted to go down to that city and collect his belongings. He had a company vehicle. I just felt
his
like I needed to get that for some reason.
his suitcase and all of his
I
other
just didn't
stuff.
want his
And
stuff sitting there. Like I
right.
wanted his things.
Um but and like this was my first real experience. I was 17. I was on the verge of being an adult, but like
Mhm.
I was still living at home. I was still in high school. This was all very kind of new crisis level for me. I had never been in a position to really deal with things on that level.
Well, your dad and I really made a point to protect you as much as possible from anything super traumatic. Like, I mean, not that
Yeah.
you didn't deal with things or have like it's
Well,
life, right? But like,
I grew up in a healthy family, a healthy household dynamic. There was
mhm,
no, very besides some of the events with your family specifically, there
yeah,
wasn't a lot of like dysfunction or,
no.
and we were very open and honest. You guys strive very
You
hard to
had a
have
very
like a
stable house.
right. You guys strive very hard to make sure that we were good at communicating with each
Mhm.
other and always hash things out right
Yeah.
away. So then if we ever had issues with each other, so
Yeah.
that we were always, always very close.
Needless to say, you were not a crisis manager.
Yeah, I am now. I mean, at this point, I've kind of taken after you, but also dealing with that has shaped my life in a very different way than I ever
Yeah,
expected.
which we'll get into.
And I've also been working in the emergency room as a nurse, and
Mhm.
I deal with that kind of level of crisis and helping other people through those
Yeah,
things on a daily basis
right.
now. But at that point, this was kind of my first real exposure to, you know, having to handle my whole entire worldview and life blow up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And so I think like from there, our thought was just like, oh my goodness, we have to call people and let them know what
yeah.
happened.
So
And we
you
don't even
got
know.
details from the sergeant as to what were the next kind of steps.
Basically, he told us that we had to wait, or told me that we had to wait until the autopsy was finished. When the autopsy was finished, that they would release his body and that we had to have like a funeral home.
Funeral.
So in the state, I don't know if it's the same for every state, but in the state we lived in, you, granted, I don't really know how you would pick up a body.
Well, I
But
think it's like
you had to have a funeral home be the intermediary or like the in between you guys. And
yeah,
so
it's an interesting,
basically it's like we
thing.
had to like the medical examiner would be calling to get additional details about Eric and his m- health, medical stuff, context of what had
Mhm.
been going on the last few days, any of that stuff to help them with their investigation of the death. Um, and then they would perform the autopsy. It was a Thursday. Their plan was to have it done by Friday. And then Saturday, hopefully it should be good to go to pick up his body, and that we needed to have a funeral home on.
Standby
Yeah,
essentially.
basically we'd have somebody picked out so that they could coordinate getting his body.
And I
So
and so we started calling people, and I remember very specifically the person you were most worried about calling was his mom.
Yeah, his mom and dad.
Yeah,
I
my
It
grandma.
literally was the worst phone call I've ever had to make in my entire life.
Right.
I've had to make some difficult phone calls in my life,
Yeah.
and that was the dread that I felt having to like part this news to them. I don't even know how to explain it. It was incredibly awful. It caused so much anxiety. And the thing is like it wasn't my fault.
Yeah. Well,
I was just the messenger.
right.
But it was just having that weight on your shoulders of like knowing that your life is totally blown apart, but now you're going to completely devastate somebody else.
I'm gonna ruin your whole day right now. Like, I have some news that it's gonna ruin your week,
Well, and
and
I
like,
totally forgot that his parents were at his sister's house, and her husband, they lived in Florida, and so
oh yeah, they were all in. Oh
yeah,
man,
so his parents were in Florida. They were coming back that day. Like they were supposed to fly out later that day or the next morning, I can't remember.
got hair in my eye.
And so I call them, and like they answer the phone. But also, besides calling them, you called. I think the first person you called was our like my grandma, your grandma.
Yeah, yeah. I called your grandma, who was married to my great grandpa, who died a few years back.
Yep.
We've been very close with her my entire life.
Yeah,
She's
she's
my great grandma, but she's not as old as you would think for being my great grandma.
no, is
Different
young
story
in
there.
spirit and
Yeah.
everything else.
So I made that call, which was terrible. And I remember calling my best friend at the time, who also was out of state. He was in Arkansas.
Hmm.
Um, and then I also, a bit of background, we're both Christian. We have a faith.
Mm-hmm.
And it played a very big role in our grief and our support system.
Yep.
And that it's different for everybody. That's what we believe. But I remember calling kind of one of the coordinators of our congregation to
Mm-hmm.
just let him know what had happened, um, and so he kind of announced it to during the next get together, or the next meeting, congregational meeting. They kind of announced that he died, and so we had a lot of people from our congregation who also knew fairly quickly, and
Yeah.
were a big support for us in those first few days. Well, all the way through the funeral, really. But um,
Well, even beyond
so
that
I
to a
was
certain
making a
extent.
lot of those calls where you were talking to my
His
dad's family.
Yeah, his
Um,
parents specifically.
right.
Yeah, I don't even remember. I just remember feeling so much dread and like I have to call and tell you this. And at this point, I think we should make it clear like we had no idea
What
what had
happened?
happened to him. We had minimal information. I had minimal information on how he was found. He was found laying on the floor next to his bed, face down. Um and there wasn't a whole lot other information. I think he had like some empty beer cans in his room, but nothing like
They didn't really
crazy.
tell us the whole. They were like, well, he had a bottle of alcohol in his room and then some beer cans, which wasn't uncommon for him to have some drinks or whatever. Um,
And just that he was laying on the floor next to the bed, so it wasn't like they found him in his bed. So that was a little bit strange. He had a gash on the back of his head, which again,
mhm.
like your brain just goes into all these different
He had
directions.
bruising on his
He had
chest,
bruising.
and they said that it looked like he was on his way back from the bathroom or something, right?
No, that was later.
Oh,
The
okay.
medical examiner had a theory as to what maybe caused those injuries, but and we'll get into that. But yeah, I
So eventually, we had family and your best friend come to our house to kind of help us, and we were
yeah.
prepping to go down to where he died to pick up his stuff. And I remember, I mean, all of it was just a blur. I don't remember who drove. I don't remember the car ride at all. I remember walking into the sheriff's or the
The police
police
department,
station to get
his stuff.
his stuff. And then I remember coming home. I don't remember going to bed. I don't remember. There's so much that I think my brain has kind of either blocked out or chosen to just like the details weren't important.
Yeah.
Um, but all I remember is what I felt, and what I felt was just completely and utterly numb.
Mhm.
There was, it was a lot of emotion and a lot of nothingness at the same time,
Mhm.
where nothing mattered
No.
anymore. Everything was just like void. I and I was kind of in a daze, I guess, or like it didn't feel like it was real life anymore.
No, it didn't. It
I felt like I was dreaming, um, going through those steps and
Mhm.
like making that journey, and like I felt like I was gonna wake up from a nightmare. Um, and I obviously we never did, but you know, the other issue with this whole event, right? It started out as any normal day, and all of a sudden our lives were turned upside down, and we had zero answers. We had no idea what happened.
Mm-mm.
We didn't have any like we had our theories, and there was a little bit of, as I have already said, there's some things that were going on behind the scenes, with my dad, in
Yeah.
terms of his mental health, and kind of self-medicating and doing some other things, but um, he had been doing a lot of work on that stuff. He had been going to therapy. He'd
Yeah.
seen a psychiatrist, and was finally on like depression meds. He had
And
gone to
even just
sleep,
the
like get
way
a
that
sleep study done,
yeah.
and like trying to get on top of his mental health. And then
But just even like the way it was just things just didn't add up. Like
right,
there was no logical answer for this.
because there
And
was like the
he
idea of
wasn't
like,
sick. He
he,
wasn't
yeah, did he had a tooth infection a few days before, if you remember
yeah.
that. And so
Yeah.
like there was kind of this idea of maybe, maybe that, and he refused to go to the dentist, or no, he went to the dentist for like the first time in a decade because his tooth
Yeah.
hurt so bad. And so we were, maybe the infection was worse than what we thought.
Well,
And
and
but then
like
that didn't really
there's
make sense because he had bruising on his ribs and the gash on his head, and we're like, maybe he fell and hurt himself. But then and then there was also the
and
idea
you're
of like,
always like, he was only like, mind you, he was 38 years old. So I was 37 at the time. Isaac was 17.
right,
He was
he
37
was
in
young,
very good health. He didn't have any chronic issues. I think he had a high blood pressure, like not exorbitantly high, but enough that he was on some blood pressure medication. So again, your thoughts kind of go to like, did he have a heart attack? I mean, it happens,
yeah.
right, with people that young. Um,
Yeah, did he have a heart attack? Did he,
did he have a brain bleed? Because we knew he had the gash on his head. I
right?
mean, there's just all these different directions that your
Or
brain
even
goes.
even did he overdose? Did he kill himself? Like there was the thought of maybe he committed suicide, and that was something that went through my brain.
Yeah, I
Just
don't know if
given
it went through my brain, but
that was, I mean, just given what had been happening with his mental health, and like he was self-medicating, and he wasn't doing well for a solid, almost,
like
well,
a year and a
like eight
half.
eight months.
Well, I think it started about a year and a half before he
Started
died,
the
but like it
summer
got really
beforehand, that,
bad the summer before he died.
right, and we didn't really know how bad it was until that winter. It was like
Hmm.
November when we figured out.
No, it was December, beginning of
Yeah,
December, when we really knew everything that was going on, and
right.
then
We could
he was
sense, we
dead by
could tell that
March.
something bad was going on,
Hmm.
but it didn't really come out what was going on with. He didn't tell us until I confronted him one day,
Yeah, but
and and he kind of told us how bad. He told me how bad his kind of mental state was,
yeah, but
and what was
either
going
way,
on,
I mean, the reality is that we had inklings about things, or things that we were a little bit like, it could be this, it could be that,
but
but
nothing made
zero
sense.
answers, no indicators, in the way that they found him, or like anything that would give us any indication as to what happened. Now, here's the thing is that when all these people start to come to your house, which the majority of people came the next day, but even that evening or that
We
afternoon,
had probably
because
20 people come through our house that night. I remember family stayed with us for a while. People spent the night at our house. Your friends spent the night.
yeah,
Grandma spent the night. I think your sister spent the night as well.
I don't know if she did.
I don't. Again, details are fuzzy on some of these things,
But
but
my point is that everyone asks, what happened?
yeah, how did it happen?
How
How
did
did
he
he die?
die? Like, and we didn't have answers. And
Right.
even the things that we were maybe a little bit concerned about, which we just, went through, we also didn't want to start the gossip mill because this is a person that we love dearly. We knew that he had struggled with few things before he died, and we hadn't even like dealt with it really completely ourselves yet. So like we didn't want to invite speculation into this whole situation either because we wanted to protect him and also just protect ourselves, I think, from having to deal with that. And like everyone loves a good salacious story and loves to talk about all the stuff. I mean, we're all human, it happens. But I just remember feeling this like strong sense of we have to be careful about what we say because we don't know, and we don't want like the rumor mill to be starting because we are talking through it and trying to figure it out ourselves and come to term with it, and other people pick it up and just run with a theory when we have no answers yet.
Yeah, yeah, and but then at the same time, having something like that, you know, in your life blow up, our whole life blew up, and then not knowing anything about like we had our the details were so fuzzy. Like I said, there was, you know, bruising on his chest, gash on his head. He's found face down in the hotel room, and that's and there was some alcohol in his room, and that was all we knew
Yep.
at that point. And
And you
and it's
feel
like and
like a
it's
responsibility for answers too, like especially like with his family
yeah,
and things like that. It's like I felt like I should have answers. Like it was my responsibility to know what happened. And it's just this feeling of like helplessness.
yeah. I mean, it was just we were stuck with having to deal with all the feelings and like without any sort of closure whatsoever. Like, if we would have known he had a heart attack and he died, and it's like, okay,
Or
well,
just like it was clear cut. Like
yeah.
just a car accident
Well,
would
and
have been clear cut. I mean, there still would have been like questions, but
one,
like
it wouldn't have taken away the pain, but it would have at least eh, I don't know how much it really would have helped to have the answers at
no,
that
but
point.
it's just like you always think like maybe if we'd known this it would have been easier or.
Right. And even with some of the injuries he had, it was like, did he get in a fight with somebody and like
Yeah, we
have
have no
internal injury?
idea.
Like, which what it was completely would have been completely out of character, but like maybe he was assaulted. Like they
It just
basically he
didn't
had bruising on his face
none
as
of it
well
makes
from
sense.
being face down, but like we didn't know how much of that was from the lividity or
Yeah.
whatever. And so there was so much mystery around it really honestly for months
Yeah.
before we had to wait for autopsy results
It
to
was
come
like
back,
3.5 months.
toxicology results to come back, the medical examiner we had to, and so and the police investigation and all of these things, you know it just didn't we didn't have any answers,
No, we didn't. And
and we just lost one of the most important people in both of our lives,
mhm,
and going forward from that too, I mean, he was my dad, but he was your husband, and
yeah.
both of us dealt with those things in very different ways because we're both different people, but like our relationship with him was very different. So we were trying to grieve very different relationships as well.
Yeah.
But that first day was a very long day, and it was extremely intense, and I it was all a blur, and it was all I think back to the day, and I remember the first bit of like panic that set in when I heard the news,
Mhm.
and then from there on I was just numb, and
Yeah.
like I felt like I was dreaming, and it was a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from.
Well, I also remember like having to go to bed that night, and there's a part of you that is just like still, I mean, the shock didn't wear off for a long time. A very long time for me. And there's a shock, and at the same time like it didn't feel a whole lot different either because he did travel regularly for work. So like it wasn't uncommon for him to be gone a night or two or a few nights in a row. And so
It's not like you were going to bed into an empty bed that normally was always full. It was like,
yeah.
you know, you work night shift,
Mhm. And then
and he traveled a lot, so
yep.
like you guys didn't always share the bed.
So like it there is this like surreality too of like he's he just feels like he's gone for work night.
Well, and part of that like dream state that you kind of go into is, or the denial kind of part of it is, there is a big part of it of like, he's not dead. He's gonna come home.
Yeah.
Like it was
Well, and
all
we hadn't seen him.
it was all a ruse. We didn't see the body. He's not gone. They had the wrong guy. Like maybe he,
You do hope. You
yeah.
hope.
Well, you hope, and you start running through that mill in your brain because you don't want to accept the, I mean, the horrifying nature of your new reality of,
Mhm.
losing somebody so important to you that has, I mean, for me, my dad, shaped who I am
Mhm.
in so many ways, and I still relied on him for a lot.
Mhm.
And nowadays, some of the things that I'm almost 23. It's been over 5 years now,
Mhm.
and you start to now I'm starting to grieve a lot of the things um that I don't get to do with my dad, that I never will. Like as an adult, I've gotten to know you as an adult.
Yeah.
I've gotten to know you as Susie and not just my mom. I've
Yeah.
gotten to know you as a friend,
Yeah.
and now I don't get that opportunity with my dad all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like I don't get to ask him about girl problems. I don't get to ask him for advice. I don't get to call him up anymore and try to figure out like, how do I fix my car, or I had and he had taught me so much up to that point already. But
Yeah. You were very fortunate to have
but
the
he
time
was a
that you
he
did
was
with
a
him, but it still wasn't enough.
yeah, he was a very smart individual, and he had so much there's so much that I still wish I could learn from him,
Mhm.
that I now never will get that
Yeah,
opportunity.
and I can't give you that same experience because even though I knew him inside and out, being together with him as long as I did, I still have a hard time remembering like how would he have responded to this? How would he have thought about this? And even if I could remember all of that, like being able to uh, give you that same sense of like how he would approach it, it's almost
Well, the
impossible.
relationship you have father son is very different than mother son.
Yeah, I'm just saying
And
like I couldn't even
right.
give you that information
And for
like
you, right, you were, I was on the verge of graduating high school. I was on the verge of leaving the house, and you guys were, I'm an only child. You were on the verge of
empty
empty
nest.
nest,
Yeah.
and you were in the process of planning what was next in your life together. I was born pretty soon after you got married,
Yeah.
and you guys were young when you had me.
Yeah.
You were what, 20,
Almost
19?
20. Yeah. And
So
we'd
you were
been
not,
married like a year and a half.
yeah, I mean, what you got you so that's the other thing is, you were married 19 years, almost
Mhm.
20.
Mhm.
You got married 2 weeks after you turned 18,
Yep.
and he was 19 or 20,
Almost 20.
almost 20,
Yeah.
and then a year and a half later you had me.
Yep.
So you didn't have a lot of time as a married couple, and you were both very young when you had me, and then I
Mhm.
was your priority. And so you guys were planning on, like, I remember you planning on, what are we going to do together when
Yeah.
Isaac's,
We had
you
two
know,
transitions
on to his
coming.
own
Yeah,
life.
I mean, we had two transitions coming up. We had you becoming an adult and sort of like moving into adult things what and we knew you wouldn't move out right away because you were planning on going to college and doing nursing school and all that. But like we knew that was coming up, but then also, having to deal with that transition of like you becoming more independent and doing your own thing and becoming an adult and how that changes with our relationship with you, but also our own relationship. Like, okay, so now we don't have to like we're not going to be planning our lives around like what's going on with you or we have to
You guys were free.
we gotta let you go a little
Right.
bit.
Well, you were on the verge, and you guys had always thought about moving to a different state, moving to California where you live now,
Yeah.
but also, or just, doing something different where you're not locked into where we were.
Yeah,
And a
I
lot of the
mean,
reason why you were is because you wanted to build a life for me and raise
mhm.
me properly, which I appreciate. Obviously, I've turned out great. Um, no, but you guys did a great job of teaching me the fundamentals of, you know, my whole life, but like communication and teaching me how to deal with the world. And a lot of that I learned after dad died too, and a lot of it I learned on my own.
Mhm.
But you guys set up that baseline very well.
Yeah.
And I know you did it very purposefully, because again, we've talked about a
Yeah.
lot of that stuff. Um, but all of that got turned upside down in a very quick period.
Yeah,
And
you just don't ever think it's gonna happen to you. And I
right.
think, like, you and I've talked about this before, is on one hand, there was obviously this disbelief and this shock, the fact that this was happening, like, I can't believe this happening to me. But there's also a part of me, my entire time that I was married to Eric, there was a part of me that subconsciously was preparing for him to not be here. I used to think all the time with him traveling, like, what if he got in a car accident? I just always was mentally preparing, like, what would it be like if he wasn't here? How would I deal with that? How would I deal with his loss? And I think there's just always a part of me that kind of had this gut feeling that something was going to happen to him. And I can't explain it. I don't claim to know why, but I just did. I remember the closer we got to you being an adult and moving out, like up until that point, I always could look in the future and see 5 years down the road what our lives might look like what our goals might be, what our lives as a couple would look like, as a family, like, the 5-year plan, whatever. You
Mhm.
could see it a little bit, not necessarily that you see into the future, but you envision what it could look like, right? And I remember a year or two before he died having just being it being a struggle to have a mental picture
Imagine your life in a few years.
after you graduated. And again, not that you were moving up, but it was a very, like, obvious time that we would start to be separate, right?
Right. And I don't think it's uncommon for people in general. Like we always have kind of what they call intrusive thoughts, or your brain kind of not picks up on patterns and does weird things. But I feel like a lot of people have played those sorts of scenarios out in
Yeah,
their
like
brain,
what would
especially
happen?
people with anxiety. You play you you play out all these crazy scenarios in your head, and you're like, what would I do in this situation? And what? And 99% of the time, those things don't come true.
Mm-mm.
But in our case, it did. Like you had this kind of weird gut feeling, and you kind of had
Yeah.
imagined, like, what would I do? But even for me, I had played through those scenarios more than once of what if I lost both my parents? What if I lost my dad? What if I lost my mom? But very specifically, I remember the Friday before he died,
Yeah.
I was snowboarding. And I remember being on the chairlift and riding up, and I was with my friends, but I kind of zoned out for like 2 minutes while we were going up, up the hill on the chairlift. And I remember they were talking, and I was just in my own little zone, and I was on that topic in my brain, thinking about like, what would I do if I got the call right now that
Mhm.
my dad died? And I don't know why. I don't know why exactly that went through my brain at that time, um, but it did. And you know, I remember almost crying in that moment just because I like went down that rabbit hole and was like, man, that would be so hard. That would be really, all of the feelings that would come with that. I just put myself in that position for some reason. And then I was like, yeah, but that would never happen, you know?
Yeah.
And then less than a week later, that exact nightmare came true.
Uh-huh.
And like you said, it was a very surreal moment because it was like, I just thought about this and like,
Well, it was like
it's weird
you're shocked and in shock,
and numb and all of those things.
but also, like, not entirely surprised.
Yeah.
It's such a weird, like, conundrum, and your brain goes into these really weird places. And then of course you're just like, what's wrong with me? Why am I thinking about
Yeah.
this stuff?
And it's anxiety, but there's, the, and after this day, right? So this is the first day that we've been talking about. For weeks, there was so much mystery around what happened.
Months.
Months, and we had still had to move forward and deal with the funeral and deal with family and deal with everybody pressuring us to figure out what happened. Like people were asking nonstop,
Even to this
any
day.
word, what happened, like, and even it's there's always an interesting thing too because people's when you say that like, oh, my dad died, or or my husband died or whatever, oftentimes the first thing that people ask you is what happened.
Yeah.
Like,
And it's
and
natural curiosity. Like, I
right,
think as humans, we just
especially in that case where it's like a
curious.
young person. He was
Yeah.
38. I was 17 when
I
he
don't
died,
know.
and everyone's like, "What happened to your
I
dad?"
mean, I have a morbid curiosity, so, like, I don't think it's abnormal, but it is a really difficult question, like, it's invasive when you're on the other end of it.
Right. Well, and in his case, when we eventually did figure out exactly what happened, and even still, we didn't have all the answers. It became incredibly complicated to explain what happened to
Mhm.
him
Without
because
without it perpetuating a stigma or a stereotype or a thought process.
we're also just ruining people's perceptions of him.
Yeah.
Because, like, part of the thing for me was my dad. I love my dad, and he loved us very deeply. He was an
Mhm.
amazing person. He was an amazing dad, a great husband. He was very loving. He loved us more than he loved himself, I think. And the way that he died was very difficult for either of us to grasp,
Mhm.
and more than that, to explain to anybody else, because there's there's stigma behind how he died and what it means for his character, and it's not who he was.
Mhm.
And so, but up until we found out, like, there was all
Oh,
this mystery.
everyone asked all the time, "Did you hear? Do you know what's going on? How did he die?" Or if they had not heard and you're like, "Oh, my husband just died." "Oh, well, what happened? Can
And
you?"
while we're waiting for answers, guess what? Life carries on.
Mhm.
The world moves on, and you're still stuck in this spot with no answers, cradling the life that you had,
Mhm.
and all the broken glass, the shards of the life you had, trying to piece things back together, and it's impossible.
Yeah. And then you have all these decisions you have to make. Like me, it was just all of a sudden it was like
Financial
everybody
issues, insurance, and like all sorts of other stuff.
the talking to the medical examiner, the funeral, all the stuff.
The funeral
And
home and the body stuff and the
I mean, speaking of day 2. Hey, you know how this works.
If you like this episode or just like us in general, you can find us at It's Going Podcast on all the things.
Don't forget to check out the links in the description.
And thanks for hanging out with us.